Well, thank you very much for having me here. I'd like to start by expressing gratitude to the Benjamin Rush Institute. It's an honor to get to join you all and to be welcomed among such a prestigious lineup. I was saying last night that this is the first time that I've ever been introduced with letters after my name. In the acting industry, you just don't do that. Merlin Huff, MFA, feels official, so I figured I'd get away with it while I can. As you might be able to hear, I'm a little bit under the weather right now. As the only one here not trained in medicine, I might be asking for some of your help after my speech. I argue very well. Ask any one of my remaining friends. I can win any argument on any topic against any opponent. People know this and they steer clear of me at parties. Often as a sign of their great respect, they don't even invite me. You too can win arguments. Dave Barry. I'm not a rhetorician. I'm not here to teach you how to win arguments against your opponents. I'm not here to teach you how to debate. I'm here to talk about the persuasive power of dialectic and emotional appeal. I'm going to talk a little bit about the significance of narrative, a little bit about mood and trust. Then I'll talk about what this looks like in practice and save a little bit of time at the end for some questions. But first, a little background on me. I've never done this before, spoken at an event like this. I went to a state school for my undergrad degree, and after a bit of vocational training, went down to LA where I lived as a struggling actor. I moved back in with my parents, and through a series of dead-end jobs, unfocused education, and career shifts, wound up working in property management in a flyover state in the Midwest. Not a very impressive story of my life. Let's try another version. I graduated from UC Santa Barbara, one of the top research institutes of the University of California system, summa cum laude, with a double major and distinction in the major. I went on to earn my MFA in acting from the Yale School of Drama, a highly selective acting school and the best in the country, which enabled me to act professionally and run an acting studio in Los Angeles, one of several businesses that I started and operated at a profit. I spent 2 years working as a management consultant for a $250 million company in Chicago, helping them grow to over $500 million. And I now work as the executive integrator and right-hand man to the owner of an asset management firm in South Dakota's largest city. The part about my never having done this before, that part is true. Almost sounds like a different story, doesn't it? My point in telling you this has little to do with my personal story and everything to do with the significance of narrative. The same facts, viewed through two different lenses, tell very different stories. Because that first guy, that failing actor guy, isn't the guy who should be up here talking to you. But that second guy, that guy who went to Yale, the guy with the letters after his name, he might be worth hearing out. So what's the difference? The facts are the same in each case, but the person described sounds like a 180-degree shift. What's different? Now I'm going to need your response here. See, I'm not here to lecture you. This isn't a rhetorical question. This is like kind of a call and response, audience engagement sort of setup. Studies have found that if you just sit there and observe, 3 days later, rates of retention hover around 13%. If you take notes, that rate of retention increases to about 25%. But if you participate, retention leaps up to around 60%. Not bad statistics, huh? Studies have also found that specific statistics are useful as a persuasion technique. Furthermore, studies have found that approximately 54.3% of statistics are completely made up. So I'm going to ask you to participate. Let's practice. A few times throughout my talk today, I'll ask you to raise your hands and say aye. Let's do it now. Raise your hands, say aye. Aye. Great, thank you. Now, I've heard horror stories about the hours that they make you guys work and study. So it's not going to be a surprise to me if a couple of you nod off during the talk, and I'll try to bring you back by asking you to raise your hands and say aye. So let's practice this participation. In the example I gave, what is the difference between those two stories?
It's like what you focused on.
Sure.
The first one was just kind of negative stuff, even though it's true. The second one was also true. Let's talk about the positive.
Sure.
basically in the transitions from each stage of your life, you focused on it being like an ascendant move,
Mhm.
something you wanted to do instead of something you had to do for having not succeeded.
Yeah, exactly. Same plot points, right? Just viewed through a different lens. So the way a story is told then has enormous impact on the emotional feeling produced. And this is what I'm going to call narrative. Narrative has a huge impact on mood. Who's telling the story and to whom also impacts the mood. Where the speaker and listener are, the background, the relationship, these all make a difference too. That's just a little teaser though. I'll speak more about mood in a second. But first, I want to talk a little bit about the context for all this. Why does all of this matter to you? Advocating an unpopular view can be difficult. Speaking to people with whom you disagree can be difficult. A challenge we often face when engaging with strongly held, differing opinions is that we feel forced to either fight or shut down. We argue or we stay silent. Those seem to be the only two options, and what it produces in our conversational partner is the exact same reaction. They fight or they shut down. Now, occasionally, you'll best someone in an argument. You might even succeed in getting them to acknowledge the points you made. But the times where a contentious situation can actually result in a genuinely open heart and changed mind are exceedingly rare. So, how does one speak into a contentious conversation? Narrative. Let's start with narrative. Here's an example. And this is a sad story. It's a story about a couple of teenagers who started having sex too young. The boy hung out with rough and rowdy crowds, and the girl's parents didn't want her to have anything to do with him. Despite the intervention efforts of both families and all the adults in this situation, the couple got involved with illegal drugs and caused the death of their two dear friends. In the end, the couple caused a great deal of pain, and both wound up so depressed that they took their own life. Some good came from it in the end, as the parents of the deceased were able to forgive old grudges. Two households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona where we lay our scene. From ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, whose misadventured piteous overthrows do with their death bury their parents' strife. Romeo and Juliet. Now this is the plot of Romeo and Juliet that I described at first. One of the most iconic and recognized love stories of all times. The version that I gave you, though, isn't terribly compelling, and it's certainly not a great love story. Not told that way, at least. The way the story is told makes a huge difference. Narrative, from the Latin telling a story or to tell. How a story unfolds is vital to the way that it's received by the audience. By creating characters and making them compelling, the audience is allowed to connect with, care about, and even root for them. Theater theorists talk about an audience's experience of recognition, where in watching a play, audience members can imagine themselves in the shoes of the character. By identifying with the characters in the story, an audience begins to see from the character's perspective. This phenomenon is understandable in the context of your traditional hero story. A hero fighting a force of evil faces odds and ultimately overcomes them. We put ourselves in the shoes of the hero, and we see ourselves as fighting a force of evil. Whether that evil is an oppressive villain, an unjust cause, or your final in biochem or gross anatomy. This phenomenon of the power of narrative is most poignantly visible when we find ourselves rooting for a villain. A good villain is delightful. Not only is a villain a necessary ingredient to define a hero, after all, who is Luke Skywalker without Darth Vader? Who is Batman without the Joker? But a well-built and well-acted villain can be incredible to watch. A character like Iago from Othello is a great example. How many of you are familiar with Othello? Raise your hand, say aye. Okay, let's try one that's more contemporary then. How about Breaking Bad? Raise your hand, say aye. There we go. A character like Walter White from Breaking Bad is a perfect example. How many of you, of those of you who raised your hand, were rooting for Walter White? Now, isn't that interesting? Walter White occupies the position taken by the hero. He is the protagonist of the story, and yet, he's a villain. Sorry, spoiler alert. I guess I announced that a bit late, though, but since the show ran from 2008 to 2013, if that's a spoiler for you at this point, then I guess you're the one that's a little late. But that's neither here nor there. The show Breaking Bad is magnificent largely because of actor Bryan Cranston's wonderful villain performance. Now, for those of you who wanted Walter White to win, now, don't worry, I won't pick on you, right? This isn't a moral judgment. Even if you didn't want him to win per se, how many of you found him captivating to watch and enjoyed tuning in to watch the show unfold? Right. For those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, Breaking Bad is a story about a high school chemistry teacher who gets diagnosed with terminal cancer. He lives a very ho-hum, average, boring life, and it only gets worse when the show starts. He decides to start cooking meth to provide financially for his family. Over the course of the show, he becomes a drug kingpin and does all sorts of deplorable things to all sorts of people. But he remains a compelling character. You kind of want him to win. You root for him. The fact that anybody would be rooting for this deplorable drug dealer is interesting, isn't it? How do they do that? At the very least, it raises a flag and makes us want to pay attention. What is going on here? What's going on here is narrative and storytelling. In screenwriting, teachers talk about the structure of a good story. It's encapsulated in some very simple advice. Create your characters. Let the audience fall in love with them. Put your characters up a tree, and then start throwing rocks at them. All stories follow this arc. Good stories do so in a way that lets you connect with likable characters. Great stories do so in a way that lets you connect with characters you would normally hate. The duty of screenwriters, then, is to create compelling characters. The audience has got to root for them and want them to win. What makes the story exciting, then, is the fear that something is going to go badly for these beloved characters, hence the throwing rocks at them. We love to see them succeed despite the odds. We love to see them triumph. And the secret reason we want to see these characters triumph is because on some level we see the character as ourself. In watching these characters succeed, struggle, and fail, we feel some small amount of joy, empathy, and dismay, too. Expert screenwriters come together with expert authors and expert directors and expert cinematographers and expert lighting teams and costumers and set designers and sound designers and editors to deliver to you a narrative that evokes an emotional response. Now, narrative is not just plot, as I demonstrated. Narrative is a story about the plot. Plot is just the facts. Narrative brings in not just the facts, but the context for the facts, the relationship between the facts, and why you should care. It's a way of telling a story that brings the audience along for the ride. It's a way of shedding light on a part of the story that the audience may not have known. Now, narrative in the context of drama, Hollywood, theater, and movies, and books is pretty self-evident. We see the hero, his opposition, what he's fighting for. This makes sense. It's not always so evident in our personal lives, though. Like I said, plot is just facts. When we're presenting facts, we are presenting plot. There's an informational usefulness in this approach, but it's not inherently emotionally compelling. In the absence of a compelling narrative, one will gravitate towards the narratives they are already living. Now, we all have narratives that are a part of our psychological makeup. We're given narratives by our parents, by our schools, by social media, by the news media, and the communities in which we engage. We're inundated in narratives all the time that swirl around us and in us and through us. Narratives affect our feelings about everything from morality, what is right and what is wrong, to plans for the future. At some point, I'll get married and have kids and then die, to our education. Getting an MD is better than not getting an MD. To fashion. Men wear ties, women wear skirts or suit pants, or to even the things that we take for granted every day, like the value of $1. These are all narrative. Now, there's something really important here, something so human that it's hard to notice. In 1949, Joseph Campbell wrote The Hero with 1,000 Faces, in which he made the claim that humans have essentially one story that we tell again and again and again. What Joseph Campbell saw in reflecting on the long story of humans, on the long history of human storytelling, is a strong, consistent, almost omnipresent theme: the archetype of the hero's journey. The hero's journey is composed of map markers, or milestones, which are archetypal in storytelling. I'll explain the structure first and then give an example to illustrate some of the concepts. First, you start out with a hero. Our hero receives a call to adventure. Often, the hero refuses at first. He wants to remain in the safety of the village he knows and loves. The call will come again and often become too strong or pressing to resist. Then the hero receives some sort of aid, often supernatural. This spurs the hero on to face the threshold of the familiar and cross over into the unknown. In the new, strange land, the hero will likely meet a helper and then a mentor. The mentor will help the hero to navigate and overcome challenges along his way towards the apex of his quest. At the apex, the hero must then face the cause of his journey. This is the antagonist of the story and the hero's nemesis. The antagonist represents that which the hero most fears or hates in himself. Having defeated the antagonist, the hero undergoes a transformation and then begins the journey back to the known. When the hero returns, however, he has the elixir. He's changed. And so he changes the society that he rejoins. So, quick recap. A hero receives a call to action, meets a mentor who has a plan to help the hero defeat the antagonist and achieve success and avoid defeat. Now, the protagonist that hero faces is not necessarily an external entity. The protagonist-antagonist archetypal struggles fall into one of four categories: man versus man, such as Aladdin and Jafar, right? Dorothy and the Wicked Witch of the West. Or man versus nature, 127 Hours. Old Man in the Sea by Hemingway, or Robinson Crusoe. Or man versus himself, Fight Club. Or finally, man versus society, Fahrenheit 451, The Handmaid's Tale, Atlas Shrugged. In stories using each of these archetypal conflicts, the antagonist is frequently represented by one individual. If the hero is in conflict with a society, a single individual or group of individuals will commonly represent the oppressive force of society as a whole. The hero's journey can be analyzed in much greater detail, but this cursory version will work for our purposes. Before I dive into examples, let me ask you, can you think of a story that fits this mold?
Hobbit.
The Hobbit, exactly. Yeah, here's a spoiler alert. If you can think of any story, it probably fits this mold. Other examples? Star Wars. Perfect. Have you read this? Here's one. Star Wars, A New Hope. Who's our hero? Skywalker. What's his call to action? Anybody remember?
Stormtroopers murder his aunt and uncle?
Yes, that's part of the call to action. The first call to action that he receives is the video projection, or the hologram, from R2-D2. Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope. And then, his family is murdered. That's the irresistible call to action, right? Because at first he refuses. He tries to turn away. He comes back to find the family farm burned to the ground, and then, well, he has to join. Who's the guide?
Yoda.
Obi-Wan Kenobi. Yoda becomes the guide in a later movie. In the first one,
I don't have them straight.
who's the villain? Now, this is a trick question. The temptation is to say Darth Vader. And if we were talking about the trilogy as a whole, you'd be right.
Yeah.
In the first movie, though, the villain is actually the Death Star. The villain is the thing that needs to be overcome, the great threat that is imperiling Luke and his very existence. And it's only by destroying the Death Star, by going into the heart of the beast and demolishing it himself, that Luke can change himself, can overcome the antagonist, and return to the rebel forces a changed man. Now, the really cool thing about this hero's journey is that it's cyclical. You go through it the first time in A New Hope. And then you go through it a second time in The Empire Strikes Back. And then a third time in The Return of the Jedi. And each time, our heroes are changed along the path of the journey that they take. The hero is transformed by his journey. When he returns home, he's different than when he left. Joseph Campbell points out that this cycle is a metaphor for human development and learning, and that events in our life can be understood using this same model. So what does this have to do with the medical industry? What does this have to do with effective communication strategies? Why did BRI invite me here to tell you about playwriting and movies and Star Wars? What's important here is the deep recognition of narrative in human beings. We cannot help but see these stories and resonate with them when we see them arise. So deep is our pull to this style of storytelling that filmmakers must actively and intentionally avoid the characteristics of the hero's journey. Any films that break this mold will struggle to do so, and even if they succeed, will fail at capturing the hearts and minds of the audiences that they're played before. Now, this shows up in society as a major motive force. If you want to inspire people to act, tell them a story of why they should care. To motivate unity among the colonies, early Americans told the story of a united colonies fighting for freedom against an oppressive monarchy. Now, the point here isn't whether the story is true or false. Stories are not true or false. They're a way of looking at the plot or facts and relating them to each other. Those elements which you choose to include or exclude, those components which you highlight or downplay, determine the overall impact of your story. So, now a question. In light of the narrative structure, who are you?
Well, I looking from all points of view as it relates to the healthcare conversation, I think I'm a hero, but I understand that I am viewed often as the villain.
That's right.
So which hat are you looking through when you ask the question? And what is the best way to comport yourself or have the dialogue when you know what you're talking into? Like, that person thinks I'm a villain, I don't. I mean, it's a very odd, it's difficult. It's hard.
That's right. It's very difficult. And you're right. You are the hero. And I'm the hero, and you're the hero, and you're the hero, and you're the hero. It depends on the lens that you're looking at the story from. But the point is that in our own life, from our own perspective, we are our own hero. We are on our hero's journey. So, then who is BRI to you? Who am I up on stage? Who is Beth? Who is Charlotte?
Mentor?
Sorry?
The mentor?
That's right. That's right. We're the mentor, or the guides, or the helpers, or maybe supernatural creatures that you meet along your way. Right? But you are your own hero. And me?
I'm the goddess.
Okay, you can be the goddess. That's right. So as much as we all want to believe that we are the center of the universe, I, Merlin, actually am. Right? I'm the hero of my own existence. Me, here, behind this podium, with this projection, hoping that this is producing value and I'm doing a good job and you're understanding what I'm saying. I'm in the midst of my own epic, heroic struggle right now. So why does that matter? Because when we all believe that we're the hero, we all believe that we are on a righteous path. Even if we doubt our convictions and change our minds, that's part of our journey. We see ourselves as the hero, and we see the others as the villains. In discussing topics, especially topics in which we disagree, we naturally place ourselves in the role of the hero, valiantly fighting or tragically and silently suffering for our side. This poses some problems. Because if we disagree, and I'm the hero, and you're the hero, who's really the hero? So just like you said, Charlotte, we see the other as the villain. And they see us as the villain. How do we reconcile that? What's the truth of the matter? Have you ever heard the phrase, The victor writes the history. If you have, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
What does that mean?
Yes.
It means yes? Thank you. Well, when the victor is the only one left, he gets to say how things went. So can you recall a time when you felt like you were made to be a villain in someone else's story? I know I have. At Yale, there have been a few articles that have come out recently about how conservative students feel unsafe, socially and physically unsafe, to disclose their conservative views. They said they feel ostracized, outcast, and vilified. They're made to be the villain. The challenge is that with your views, you are likely to be seen as the obstacle, the threat, the villain, the opportunity. With your new understanding of story and narrative, more options are available to you. You can begin to rewrite the narrative. You can begin to tell your story in a compelling way. So let's get back to Walter White of Breaking Bad. How did they get away making such a detestable character our hero? They told his story. What do I mean by that? They told the story of Walter White not as a brilliant, mustache-twisting, successful, premeditated, got-it-all-put-together drug lord. No. They told the story of a struggling, aging, bumbling, no idea what he's doing, wanting to do right by his family, doing a dirty job because it's the best he can see to do in middle school chemistry teacher. By letting us see his struggle, his sadness, his understandable desires, we connected with him. We identified with him. We saw some part of ourselves in him. So when he started to succeed, we thought, well, what he's doing isn't good, but he's doing it for good reason. We rooted for him. We watched his transformation from someone uncertain and searching to someone confident and powerful. We as individuals connect with the same desires in ourselves. We too know what it's like to feel lost, uncertain, overwhelmed, and hopeless. We too know what it's like to gain a little bit of confidence and how good that transition feels. We like these narratives because we can relate. The art of narrative is the art of getting others to care. This isn't spin. Spin is telling a lie or a half-truth in a way that manipulates the hearer into believing something that is false. Storytelling, on the other hand, allows us to connect the story by hearing it in a different way. So, can you see how this relates to medicine? When we understand that others see themselves as the hero, we can have sympathy for them. We can position ourselves not as the villain, but as the guide, the person to help them achieve what they want to achieve. When we understand that others see us as a villain, we can retell the villain's story, our story, in a way that humanizes us and makes our experience more accessible. We understand how humans listen for and connect to stories. When we understand how humans listen for and connect to stories, we can tell our own story of where we came from and how we came to believe what it is that we believe. When we attempt to tell our own story, we often want to hide the unsavory bits. On social media, we carefully curate our image to show an ideal version of our life. In conversation, we go right for our ultimate conclusion instead of the winding conversation and exploration that got us there. Telling our story means letting others in to see our journey, where we've come from, and how we got to be where we are. When we attempt to tell our own story, we only give the facts. We summarize the plot. We argue. We're under the illusion that giving facts will persuade, and we wonder why others don't connect with our narrative. Mood. I'd like to change topics now and talk a little bit about mood. A teacher of mine once told me, mood is everything. It's not the only thing, but it's everything. In another conversation, he expressed the same sentiment, saying, having the right conversation in the wrong mood is the wrong conversation. His point, as I took it, is that mood is a state of being which colors all the plot points we encounter, all the facts. In a certain mood, we're predisposed to write our narrative in a certain way. If we're in a frustrated, stressed out, running behind mood, a surprise visit from a friend at your door might feel like an ill-timed intrusion. In a laid-back, joy of living, open to possibility mood, that same visit could show up as a delightful opportunity. Mood is powerful. Mood is an individual experience, but it's also a collective experience. Have you ever been in a room when somebody walked in a really bad mood? If you've had this experience, raise your hand and say aye. You know how that feels, right? If you're paying attention, you can feel the effect that that mood has. Mood is contagious. Bad moods, good moods, they're contagious. The same thing can happen when you're in a room of very grumpy, very locked down, angry people, and one person is uncontrollably smiling or laughing. It starts to break the tension. People start to feel that mood. The theater architect who built one of the main stage indoor theaters at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival studied collective responses to stimuli. He found that audience reactions had a tendency of spreading to those sitting next to the responsive person, and that those reactions stopped at aisles. The laughter, for example, experienced by one person made the person next to him more likely to laugh, which made the person next to him more likely to laugh, and so on. When the laughter reached an aisle, it stopped. The Angus Bomer Theater at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival is built with no aisles. The rows of seats run continuously across the auditorium to the other side. Attendees in the middle must do that awkward side wiggle walk thing, like they're trying to get to the window seat in an airplane. And this isn't a modern theater. It's intentionally designed to facilitate the community experience of mood. So if this can happen with good moods and bad moods, generally speaking, would you believe me if I told you that this could happen with combative moods too? Physiologically, what is mood? What phenomena are at play in this thing I'm calling mood? What does a bad mood look like? The quantifiable changes in varying degrees of intensity are physiological changes in the body. Pupils constrict, blood pressure increases, breathing gets shallower or nearly stops, muscle tension increases, adrenaline is released into the system, and cortisol levels go through the roof. When we encounter someone in a combative, argumentative mood, we receive that mood, and if we're not careful, our fight or flight response gets triggered too. Fighting begets fighting. Certainty begets certainty. The more right you believe yourself to be, the steeper of a hill you're setting yourself up for in conversation with others. There are a lot of moods that we could talk about. Good moods, bad moods, happy moods, sad moods. For our purposes, I'd like to put them all into the framework of what a teacher of mine referred to as the Green Valley. The Green Valley is a visual representation of the mood of openness, or lack thereof. Down at the bottom there, we have pretense. Pretense means I disagree, but I'm not even open enough to tell you that I disagree. We all know what that looks like, right? Oh, yeah, good, sure, great idea. Pretense. How many of you are familiar with that mood in yourselves or others? Raise your hand, say aye. The next level up, there's slightly more openness, right? Certainty. Slightly more openness, but not a whole lot. Certainty means, I know I'm right. Anybody who disagrees with me is wrong. How many of you are familiar with that mood? Raise your hand, say aye. Going up one level from there, we get to discovery. Discovery is a different space of openness. Discovery is curious and interested and exploratory. Discovery is, tell me what you mean by that. In environments of a strong power differential, a boss-worker relationship or parent-child or professor-med student, the openness tends to get pushed down toward a more closed mood. In environments of danger, openness tends to evaporate. And in environments with lack of trust, you guessed it, openness disappears. Productive conversations happen up here in discovery. In the majority of cases, winning an argument only succeeds in pushing people down into pretense. Have you ever seen Ben Shapiro debate? He comes out guns blazing, and he's sharp enough that oftentimes people are left without a response. They shut down, they go silent. He hasn't changed their minds or produced alignment. He's just shut them up. He's pushed them down into certainty or worse, into pretense. When people are forced to concede a point that they don't agree with, that's where they live. Their hearts and minds aren't changed. They're just left feeling wrong. To have a productive conversation, start by first seeking to produce a productive mood. No amount of rational argument will change a deeply held emotional belief. Let me say that again. No amount of rational argument will change a deeply held emotional belief. So let's do an exercise. I'd like you all to think of a time when you changed your mind. Now, I'm looking for something fairly substantial, not a decision between a grande and a venti latte, but something of significance to you. What did you believe that you stopped believing? Who were you talking to, or what were you reading when it happened? Where were you? How are you feeling? Some examples of deeply held emotional beliefs, right? Faith or lack of faith in God. Political beliefs. What's better, dogs or cats? Oh, you guys took that really seriously. Some real dog and cat lovers out there, I guess. Now, I admit, this is not necessarily an easy exercise I'm asking you to do. When I attempted it myself, I had a difficult time recalling a specific moment when my mind was changed. I can remember eras and shifting paradigms, but remembering a specific pivot point is not always easy. So why then do we expect it to happen in conversation or argument with others? There are a few common elements that are present for me when I think back on my changed mind. Time, setting, and mood. Time. Most of the times I came to a new conclusion happened not in an instant or in the scope of one conversation or in the reading of one book, but over the course of days, weeks, months, or even years. The second element for me is setting. Who I was talking to made a big difference. Where we were was also factored in. Where I was in my life, where I had just come from, where I was going, how tired or hungry I was, who was in my social circle, these all weighed in too. Perhaps most significantly, this element of setting also includes my first-hand personal experience of the beliefs in question. What I mean is, the setting includes experiences that I personally experienced to help change my mind. The third element that shows up for me is one that I've been talking about all along, mood. In my own example of a changing mind, I started from a place of arrogant dismissiveness. I knew I was right, so it was no point talking to those idiots. I then evolved to a more mature position of righteous argument, where I was right and they were wrong, and I would defend my position to the death. Next came a mood of exploratory discovery, where I was open to real discussion. And finally, if I was really lucky, I would emerge into a mood of open curiosity, where someone who held a different belief could show me what they saw. Time and setting both influence mood. The three main elements: time, setting, and mood. So now think back on your example, if you were able to think of one. Think about those elements in particular. Time. How long did it take for you to change your mind? Setting. Where were you? Who were you talking to, and what had changed about your personal experience outside of the conversation? Mood. In the conversation, were you exploring with a friend or arguing with an adversary? I would bet that in your examples, the following things are true. Time. It probably took a little while for you to change your mind. It probably didn't happen over the course of one conversation. 2, setting. You had some personal experience in the issue that left you open to a new belief. Mood. You were in an open, receptive mood, probably talking to a friend, not arguing with an adversary. Now here's my example. You know the phrase, if you're young and not liberal, you're heartless, and if you're old and not conservative, you're stupid? Yeah, well, that encompasses the story pretty well. I was young and not heartless. I grew up in California. I attended a school that espoused the benefits of charity and helping the poor. I ate a steady diet of social justice stories. I believed through and through that it was my obligation, my duty, and your duty, more importantly, to help those in need by giving them what we have. So thoroughly did I hold this deep emotional conviction that I disrupted many a family get-together, as Beth can attest. I said at the beginning that I'm not a rhetorician, but that's a little misleading. When I was younger, I fancied myself quite the debate champion. I was armed with facts and figures and anecdotes, and I was eager to jump in with 2 feet into argument with anyone who even sniffed of a differing opinion. I argue very well. Ask any one of my remaining friends. So thoroughly so thorough was my zealous conviction that I was deaf to the arguments of others. Subject to the most extreme confirmation bias, I was convinced that if there was any truth in the opposing side, they would have convinced me. Or worse, they would have defeated me in argument. It wasn't until years later that I started to change my tune. After struggling in the postgraduate professional world and facing real-world challenges, after many conversations with infinitely forgiving family members and friends, after personally encountering the hurdle of a very broken social health insurance program, and after a lot of reading and research, and after coming to a place of curiosity about the deep roots of the problems that I was seeing, I finally arrived at a place of openness where my mind was available to be changed. Now here's the real kicker to the whole thing. When I started to tell my own story of my struggle with healthcare, when I presented the plot points, I found two very distinct reactions. My conservative family that had endured my tirades, but were already familiar with those narratives, they embraced me and had a knowing sympathy for the adversity that I'd faced. My liberal friends, on the other hand, reacted to my challenges with surprise and suspicion. This was particularly salient for me because I had been where they were standing. I knew what it was like to believe in the single-payer healthcare system. I had argued about the merits of social healthcare, and after I had experienced it personally, not theoretically as I had when I had advocated for it, I found that I had to rely on relationship to even get my friends to hear me out. And those people who kept defending it were often people who were receiving employer-based healthcare, not people who actually had to rely on the social healthcare that's out there for individuals. So they were arguing from a position of no experience. They told me I must have done something wrong, or that I had an unusual experience, that it's not that bad, that I was making a bigger deal out of it than it was. Their deeply held emotional belief was preventing them from hearing my story. When it comes to conversation about deeply held beliefs, we humans have a few things that get in our way. We're not computers. Much as we wish to believe it were otherwise, we are not purely rational beings. If we were, there would be no market for diet pills. I heard it said that if knowledge were sufficient to change our beliefs, we would all have six-pack abs. Emotions drive belief. Rational argument is just a linguistic representation of a deeply felt belief. No amount of good arguments will change someone's mind. So what do? This is great and all, but what does it look like? When I'm in a confrontational situation, what do? Mood. Mood is the most fundamental approach. When I'm it impacts all the others, and all the others influence mood. Start with what you can control, yourself. Pay attention to your breathing. Is it fast or slow? Deep, full breaths or shallow ones? If your body is tight and you're breathing shallow, you're probably not in the best mood for a productive conversation. Remember, the person to whom you're speaking will feel your mood, even if they aren't conscious of it. To produce a mood of openness and curiosity in them, seek to produce a mood of openness and curiosity in yourself. There are other ways of shifting the mood too. Humor is an excellent tool for breaking tension and allowing mood to begin to shift. Seek to engage in dialectic, not debate. Persuade, don't argue. Realize that the person you're talking to sees himself as the hero. Instead of trying to do battle with him and prove him wrong, help him to explore. Bring your genuine curiosity and ask him questions about his beliefs. Explore not to gain ammunition for an attack, but to learn and discover and connect. Position yourself as the mentor rather than the nemesis. A great technique for this is to inquire deeply. Find out what they really care about. Don't just accept the surface level. So they say they care about social justice. What do they mean by that? And why is that an issue of concern to them? Pay attention to the mood with this line of questioning. Be careful you don't come across as condescending, right? What does that look like? Oh, okay, so tell me why you care about that, right? That's the false question. That's the preparation for the attack. And people can feel it. That's the tiger getting ready to pounce. So then the answer isn't genuine. The answer is defensive. Genuinely explore what they care about and why. I bet you'll hit bedrock somewhere around human flourishing. It's hard to distill much further than that. Starting from a common ground that you both can agree on will help you explore together as allies instead of opponents. Given the opening, take the opportunity to tell your own story. Acknowledge your doubts and fears and uncertainties and confusions. Share the journey that brought you to where you are. By allowing yourself to be seen, by lowering your shields, you encourage them to do the same. Notice if you're fighting to win. Pay close attention to what you're up to in the conversation. Do you want to change their mind? Then ask yourself if what you're doing is taking you closer to or farther from that goal. If you're going farther, change what you're doing. In acting terms, what you want is your objective, and what you do to get it are your tactics. Your objective never changes, but your tactics do. In conversation, you must allow your tactics to change when the argument isn't working. There's a saying in theater: when a director argues with an actor, the director loses, even if the director wins. Even if the director gets his way, the director loses because the resulting acting is uninspired and hollow. To get an actor to realize the director's vision, a director must persuade, encourage, entice. Bring a mood of genuine curiosity to the conversation. Greeks had a word for the space of being without narrative: ecstasis. This means to be beside or outside of oneself. In the space of ecstasis, one experiences pure feeling and motive force without cognition or narrative. This is a rare space, achieved only through altered states of being, in dreams and under the influence of entheogens. For most of us sober, narrative is the way we relate to the world. Because we live in narratives about the world, and because we see ourselves as the hero of the story, we must pay attention to this phenomenon in others. We must recognize the narrative that gives rise to mood, and the mood that influences the narrative. Seeing this in others allows us to see it in ourselves. Shifting that mood in ourselves allows us to begin to shift it in others too. To produce a mood of openness, seek to exhibit that mood yourself. Generate a mood of mutual inquiry. Ask questions. Be curious. Breathe. To be dignified, grant dignity. Be the guide that helps the lost hero find his way. Seek first to understand, and then to be understood. Because when you argue to win, nobody does. Thank you very much for your time and attention. And now I'll open it up for questions. And if we have no questions, I've got some bonus material that I can throw in. Yeah.
So if you're going to engage with someone in a conversation, you can tell if they're really closed off. Like
Yeah.
They're not open at all. Do you think there's any value in continuing the conversation, or would you think just best to just call it there?
It depends on the circumstance. It depends on the relationship, right? If I'm in a conversation with one of my liberal friends, the history that we have together allows for a basis of trust that I can lean on to speak into that space and to produce a changed mind. If you're talking with somebody on a debate stage, there's very little relationship history, and it's really difficult to produce any sort of meaningful shift. You see it in debate stages all the time, right? How many times have you attended a debate where there's an audience where one of the speakers authentically changes their mind mid-debate because of a point that's made, right? Everybody has their own agenda that they're bringing to the thing. If you take even I love listening to the IQ squared debates, the intelligence squared. I think that they're magnificent. And at the same time, they suffer from the same problem that all other debates suffer from, which is that the people who are there represent a certain agenda. They're not showing up to have a genuine conversation, they're showing up to win. So it depends on the relationship and the context. Occasionally, you can begin to produce a mood of openness, right? And I think that with a little bit of training and experience, even Jordan Peterson could have seized on that moment, right, when she laughed and doubled down and built the relationship up from there. And he's so cognitive and data-based that he sat back and went for his data points again. which missed the window, missed the opportunity to build relationship. Because the point that he was there, he was having to defend himself, wasn't speaking into a space of openness. And if instead he could have shifted his disposition at that moment to really build on that, there might have been a little bit more hope. Not a lot, but maybe a little.
Thank you very much. I think your story about changing your views on healthcare and how it should be financed is an interesting one. I'm trying to get my head around like how to extrapolate that. So what would have happened had you not had your personal experience with the healthcare system in the way that you did?
I think that given time and relationship with people of differing views, there would have been a gradual shift. My point about my personal experience in the matter was that was a very strong catalyst for my own internal shifting of views, without which it probably would have taken a much longer time.
So essentially then our goal when we're engaging with people on these sorts of issues is, like, I guess you said that basically create a space of openness where when a catalyst happens, they're receptive.
Exactly. Because if you're facing somebody who is staunch, they've got their trenches dug, and they've got their guns aimed at you, there's very little hope of changing their mind. Now, I was fortunate enough that the people that I had been arguing with, my conservative family, they were there to embrace me when the opening was there.
So these liberal friends of yours who weren't willing to re-engage with you after you've had a change of heart, had they gone through without being open beforehand, had they not had a relationship with Beth and they had your exact same medical experience, what would their interpretation of that been?
I think that the catalyst would have done the lion's share of the work, right? Their personal experience, their personal firsthand experience might have changed their mind, probably not to the same degree that my mind was changed. But my point in bringing them up was that though I wasn't effective at producing a 180-degree shift, by using the basis of a trusting relationship, I was able to speak into that space. And I was eventually able to open some of their minds and so open some of their eyes to the experience of, to the brokenness of the social healthcare system.
I think too, not everybody's honestly open, you know, and so sometimes what you're dealing with is creating a space that if they ever become really honestly open to the dialogue, they know they can turn to you, right? So again, it's not about convincing people. It's more about changing how we even talk about these situations. I mean, so your family is trained very much in openness and in inquiry, right? So the more we can create, you know, give people a space of openness and inquiry and create that. I don't know if a trigger, you know, maybe some experience would happen like that. There are so many people that their filters are so thick and they're just not intellectually, honestly open to it. You may never reach them. But the best you can do is say, should that happen, here's a place, I'll play with you really authentically and explore with you authentically.
And here's the bonus to that, Beth, that when you're engaged in those sorts of conversations, it's not always the person that you're speaking to whose mind is changing. When you engage in that style of openness, you then become an accessible resource to people who are witnessing that conversation. People who are on the fence, people who are uncertain.
So that makes a lot of sense, because like kind of what I'm hearing from both of you, and it's very true in medicine too, is like 45% of our patients are going to get better no matter what we do. 45% are going to get worse, and there's, you know, some small fraction where like your intervention actually matters. And so like you come from an open family. My guess is that even if you hadn't been primed with conversations with Beth, you would have interpreted your experience with the healthcare system in a way that lets you change your mind a little bit. And some of these other people who you're describing who just aren't ever going to be open to it, like they could get neglected for care and have terrible outcomes for 6 months and it wouldn't change anything. So I guess I like this idea of making yourself a magnet so that you're only seeing that 10% of patients who are open to changing. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not worth wasting your time with the people who are going to change their mind or who aren't. It's like trying to find people who may or may not. And
Yeah,
how do you
that's
select only for conversations with those people?
I think that's definitely, I mean, you do have to pick and choose your battles, right? And there are some people who are so close. And I'll go into a little bit more with my talk on maybe some strategies, but we want to change. It's not just changing an individual, it's also changing the culture within which we talk about these things. And so that gets to the point of what you're saying, even if the person you're directly interacting with is immovable for whatever psychological, emotional, whatever, you don't know what else you're changing. And you're just opening up a door because who knows what they will experience. So it's, go ahead, but you've got it.
Oh, I was just going to say, in terms of people not being open, I find that people are open about something. So, if the thing that you're talking about, they're not open about it, then approach, I talk about something else that they're more open to talk about, and then you build a relationship, and then maybe later you can talk about the thing you want to talk about, and they'll be more open to it, because, you're friends now.
Excellent point.
All right, well, I'll leave you with the shortest story ever. For sale, baby shoes, never worn. It's a story that's attributed to Hemingway. What's important in that story is the context, the implication, right? Shortest story ever. The fact that I primed it as a story now sets you up to hear the narrative that's there. I don't have to say anything beyond those 6 words, and yet it resonates with you. Thank you guys very much for your time.